Hello there, folks. This is Lawrence here. So, I wanted to be a real YouTuber and make a tier list on just the spells and traps from the Toon lineup of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, the Toon archetype. So, I'm going to go over my criteria, I guess, real fast. So, S tier is anything that is just straight up broken, overpowered, stuff that gives you a ridiculously good effect with no downside, that kind of thing. A tier is anything that's too good to not use, if that makes any sense. B tier is anything that's generally decent. You know, you can run it, you can not. It's kind of personal preference, up to you. C tier is anything that requires either a lot of setup or getting lucky. D tier is anything that's really niche. It has one specific purpose in a deck, and you wouldn't run it otherwise. And F tier is just straight up, there's no reason to use it. None whatsoever. No reason to ever use anything in F tier. Don't even think about it. Ooh, blueberry blackberry smoothie. Getting all the berries in there. Alright, so we're going to start off with Toon World. Toon World I'm going to put in D tier, because it actually does have one very niche use, and that is in very heavy combo decks. So, what do I mean by that is, because you have you have two cards that are level 4 or lower in Toons that can special summon themselves long as Toon World is up, Gemini Elf and Mermaid. And that can help you set up combo decks. It's not the reason you would use Toon World over Toon Kingdom in that case is because your end board probably isn't going to have any Toons on the board. So there's no reason to dump 3 possible useful materials to the banish pile. And, if you're not going to be protecting your monsters. So that's the only time you would use Toon World, is if you really don't need any... It's kind of sad to say, is if you don't need any of the other Toon cards because you're just planning on getting rid of them another way. And which, let's be honest, at that point, you're not even really running a Toon deck. So, there we go. D for niche. Next up, we are going to do Toon Kingdom, and we're going to put that in A tier. If you're running a Toon deck, you need Toon World up on the board. Toon Kingdom takes the name Toon World, and it offers all the protections. The big downside is that you're going to start dumping materials that you may use. You're going to start dumping resources that you may use into the banish pile on accident. And unfortunately with Toons, once something's in the graveyard or banish pile, that's pretty much it. It's gone for good. There's a couple of cards to help you get around that, but not many. But it is a very acceptable risk to keep all of your Toons essentially immortal. Your opponent can't target them with banishes, bounces, or destruction, or anything like that. And they, generally speaking, cannot be destroyed by battle or card effect, so it's really good. Toon Table of Contents, I actually put in the S tier, and I want to explain why. Because you gotta think about it. Toon Table of Contents, especially with the introduction of Toon Bookmark, at this point searches out the entire archetype. Because Toon Table of Contents searches out anything that has Toon in the name. Toon Bookmark has Toon in the name, but like Mimicat and Comican don't. So you can search out Bookmark and then use Bookmark to search out the other card. This is all at 0 cost to you. There is no downside to using Toon Table of Contents, which is why I put it in the S tier. Because there's no draw restrictions like Pot of Extravagance that you cannot draw any more cards this turn. There's no summon restrictions saying that you can only summon 1 Toon per turn or anything like that. It is straight up free. Like, think of any other archetype right now, like, I don't know, dinosaurs, had something like Toon Table of Contents, where it's just search out your entire archetype at no cost, at no cost would be the word, at no downside. And for that, we're putting that in the S tier. Next up, we have Toon Bookmark. The only reason it is not in S tier along with Toon Table of Contents is because you can only use one of them per turn. So it pretty much does the same thing, searches out almost the entire archetype, Basically, if Toon Table of Contents doesn't search it, Toon Bookmark will search it. Toon Bookmark searches out anything that has Toon World in its text. So between these two cards, you have access to your entire archetype. There's no reason you shouldn't make a play. Next up, we are going to do Toon Rollback, and I'm going to put that in C tier. What Toon Rollback does is you pick one of your toons and it gets to attack twice. It doesn't stack though, mind you, so it's not like it gains an extra attack this turn. No, it gets to attack twice only. So you can't like dump all 3 Toon Rollbacks onto one card and let it attack, 4 times? It doesn't work that way. The reason it's going to be in C tier is, generally speaking, you're not going to be summoning anything. Generally speaking, you're not going to be able to summon enough stuff for an OTK utilizing Toon Rollback. There's ways you can do it with other cards, but with Toon Rollback, you would have to have, if at the earliest convenience, 2 Black Luster Soldiers on the board and one of them having Toon Rollback. And that's not the easiest thing to do, actually. So it requires a lot of setup. You can build a deck around the idea of Toon Rollback and getting an OTK with it. It's just not very consistent. Comic-Con coming up. We're going to put that in generally decent, because yes, it does require a lot of setup or luck, like my C tier explanation. But generally speaking, even if you don't plan on doing anything with it, the ability to just steal one of your opponent's monsters is huge. And it turns them into a toon, giving them the protection from Toon Kingdom and allowing them to attack direct damage. And they won't have summoning sickness because they're already on the board. So for that reason, we're giving Comic-Con a bump up above C tier. But you, generally speaking, do have to, in order to make it consistent for an FTK, you do need to play something like Nibiru and hope that the opponent plays enough stuff that you can bump it up to an OTK range. Next up, we have Toon Page Flip. I'm going to put that also in A tier. That is a free special summon. The only downside, the only reason it's not broken is because it's once per turn. And it's a simple enough explanation is that you get a free special summon. The only other condition, you have to have 3 toons with different names in your deck to activate and resolve the card. Or, you have to have Toon World up as well. But if you don't have the 3 separate toon monsters, you can't use the card. We are going to put Mimicat. I'm torn between these two. I'm going to put it in C tier. It requires a lot of setup or luck. It would be closer to like a C- or a D+, by the way. So it's one of those. So the whole thing about Mimicat is if you have Toon World and a Toon Monster, you can then go through your opponent's graveyard, and if you pick a monster of theirs, you special summon it to your side of the field or if you choose a spell or trap, you set it to your side of the field. Now, the thing about that is, Yu-Gi-Oh! Nowadays, a lot of the stuff your opponent's using is going to be archetype specific. So there are some great general use cards you can get, like Forbidden Droplet or Infinite Impermanence, but if it's a monster, Mimicat doesn't even turn it into a toon. It's just you Monster Reborned it to your side of the field, which is almost worthless. There's a few specific examples it might really help out with, like if, I don't know, geez, I can't even think of any at the moment. The closest thing I can think of is Invoked, but I don't think Alistair goes to the graveyard. I think he banishes himself. I'd have to double check that, but any situation like that. Also, because it's not a quick play, if this was a quick play, I'd put it probably C+, because you're still relying on the opponent to have something, but, it's going to be C-. It's almost a D tier card, but yeah, so with Mimicat, the only acceptable targets would be their spells and traps, and at that point, you're kind of banking on them having, like, Infinite Impermanence or Forbidden Droplets or, anything like that you can use that isn't specific to their archetype, which is where Mimicat fails, is a lot of the cards are going to be archetype specific nowadays. The next one we're going to do is Shadow Toon. I'm actually going to put that in the middle right here. It's better than Mimic Cat, but worse than Toon Rollback. So Shadow Toon, you pretty much you target one of your opponent monsters and you do direct damage based on their attack. It's decent enough. You can only do it once per turn though. So if you could just spam it, like if you had all three of them and they had a 3,000 or what would they need? Yeah, whatever, just 3,000. I can't think of the exact number off the top of my head, but they, throwing a general number out there. If they had 3,000 or more attack, and you could do all three Shadow Toons in one turn, yeah, I'd probably put that up to generally decent. But because it's one turn, it's one use only per turn, I'm just going to leave it here in C tier. Alright, so let's get into their trap cards. Toon Defense, no reason to ever use this. Do not ever use Toon Defense. So what Toon Defense does is if Toon World is on the board, and by the way, this was way before Toon Kingdom came out. This was like original Toons. If Toon Kingdom is on the board and your opponent targets a level 4 or lower specific Toon monster to attack, you can take direct damage instead. Even if it's in defense mode, it doesn't matter. This is the kind of masochistic stuff that Toon players had to play back in, like, what's it called? Spell Rulers, Magic Rulers, whatever it was called, when they originally came out. And by the way, when they originally came out, your only level 4 or lower was Toon Mermaid. Now, I'm going to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that was one of the original spells, Toon Defense. It might have come out a little bit later, whenever, like, Gemini Elf in Goblin Attack Force did. I might be messing up my time frames. You're gonna have to forgive me. I took like a 15-year break from Yu-Gi-Oh. No, not 15-year. Stopped playing it when I was in high school. Left for the Navy, came back, and I've only recently gotten into it. So it's been look, it's been a while. I'm probably messing up my timelines, but this was one of the original Toon cards from way back in the day. Because of Toon Kingdom, you don't have any reason to use it. Toon Kingdom does everything this does, but better. So there you go. Next up, we have Toon Briefcase. I'm gonna put that higher than Comic Hand. I'm gonna put that higher than Comic Hand in the B tier. So what Toon Briefcase does is if you have Toon Monster on the board, you can, whenever your opponent summons a monster, you just bounce it. It's pretty much compulsory. It's an archetype specific compulsory evacuation device. It's pretty good. The only reason I wouldn't put it any higher is because it is a trap. So you have to go. So if you don't go first turn, you're probably not going to be able to use it. And generally, how I build my Toon decks is if I'm building it to go first, I'll add this, and if I'm building it to go second, I'll add Comic Hand. Next up, we have Toon Mask, and I'm going to put that higher up on the C tier. It's better than the other one, so we're going to put it right here. What Toon Mask does, if you have Toon World on the board and your opponent summons a monster, you flip this and you get to special summon a Toon with a lower level. And that's kind of another going first card. The problem is, Toons are consistent enough, you shouldn't need it. So that's why I put it in a C tier. Because, like, I'll tell you, it is generally decent, definitely. But because you just shouldn't need it, is essentially it. Between Toon Table of Contents and Toon Bookmark, you should be able to put out a monster on the board. Alright, and our final final spell and trap that we're going to talk about is Toon Terror, and I'm going to put that under generally decent as well, but it's going to be higher than Toon Briefcase. It's your archetypical Omni-Negate. The only downside is you can only use it once per turn. I guess the only downside would be the other downside is you have to have Toon World and a Toon Monster, but between Bookmark and Contents, that's not very hard to do. So yeah, that's the only downside to it. Otherwise, I'd put it in too good not to use, because you could just lay 3 of them and have 3 negates. This is, even in decks that I don't run specific to going first, I'll play 1 copy of this because it is nice to have. So that's gonna be it for this. This is my tier list for the spells and traps only of the Toon archetype. Feel free to tell me what you think should have gone where in the comments below. In the meantime, I am Lawrence, and y'all go out there and treat each other like you have some sense.